Hello, my name is Samantha Brown, and I'm a flutist with the Polaris Orchestra. For today's Tuesday talk, I want to speak to you about a piece of not quite flute-specific history, but certainly flute-adjacent history, and talk to you about a composer who most, if not all, flutists today know very well, but I think more musicians and just lovers of music in general should know. And that composer is Cécile Chaminade. Cécile Chaminade was a female French composer born around the 1850s, and she died in the 1940s. What I find so interesting about her life story is that she was very, very well known during her lifetime, not only as a composer, but also as a performer. She was a pianist, and she was known not just in her home country of France, but actually throughout Europe, especially in England, and very well known in the United States as well. What's sad about her story is that even by the end of her own lifetime, so in the 1930s up until her death in the 1940s, her name was already starting to fall out of popularity until today, when very, very few of her pieces are played with any regularity, with the exception of the Concertino for Flute and Piano, Opus 107. The concertino is known by most flutists today as simply the Chaminade. So if you know a flutist, go talk to them, go ask them about the Chaminade, and 9 times out of 10, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And this piece is kind of like a rite of passage to us. So most of us have either played it, maybe in our older high school years or younger undergrad years, or at least had a peer play it, so we know the piece well. Although I should say that there is so much to love and express and emote in this piece that you could play it for the rest of your days and always have something new to say, a new perspective to get out there. So like I said, Cécile Chaminade's pieces are, other than the concertino, are not very well known, which is surprising given that she actually wrote and published more than 400 pieces during her lifetime. What's remarkable for her is, unlike many female composers of her time period, she seemed to not have as big of a problem getting her composed pieces published. So most of her pieces actually did get published. And she published more than 400 pieces of many different styles. As a pianist, of course, many of her pieces were for piano. So she wrote piano miniatures, character pieces, etudes, piano sonatas, and trios. But she also wrote a ballet, she wrote a Concertstück, and she wrote many melodies or French art songs. So there's tons of works out there and even published by Chaminade, and we're just not hearing them as much today. During her lifetime, she was very well known as a performer. So she toured throughout Europe, and notably, she was very well liked in England, where Queen Victoria actually had her frequently as an honored guest. And that popularity kind of spread out and made its way throughout Europe and to the United States. And so-called Chaminade clubs started popping up all over. And these clubs were usually created by women, by female musicians who were either performers and or composers and really wanted to get together, inspired by the success and the beautiful pieces of Cécile Chaminade, and they wanted to get together and champion women performers and performances of music by women composers as well. If you do a little bit of digging on Google, you can actually see that some of these Chaminade clubs still exist today, about 110, 115 years later, which is really remarkable. And even if they're not still called Chaminade clubs today, although there still are a few, sometimes they've merged with other local music organizations and sort of merged goals as well. So maybe they're not just championing female composers, female performers, but maybe just new music in general, or getting more performances of less well-known pieces as well. So look out for a local Chaminade club if you have one. And those clubs actually made their way to the United States before Chaminade herself did. So she came to the United States to tour 12 major cities in 1908, and mostly on the eastern side of the United States, but as far west as St. Louis. and she was very, very well received. Supposedly she did not speak a word of English, but she was still well received by members of these Chaminade clubs who were so excited to meet like the celebrity that had inspired them to make these music organizations in their own local communities. After this, she did receive eventually an honor from the French Legion of Honor, although it is interesting to note she was more well received in England and in the US than she was in France. And she was actually the first woman to receive this honor. Critically, her music was received differently by critics versus by the public. So like I said, her music was played very, very often. And since most of it was piano music, a lot of it was played in the home, especially, sheet music was being sold at this time. So people were buying the sheet music and playing it in their home as salon music. At this time, much of the music of the orchestras or, big music venues was dominated by German composers. So sort of strike one against her was that she was a French composer in a time where German compositions were really dominating the musical scene in the concert hall at the time. And of course, critics also had something to say about the fact that she was a female musician and a female composer. So one of their complaints was that her character pieces or her lighter piano pieces were too feminine. They were too trivial. There wasn't enough meat and potatoes to them, not enough substance. They were cute, but you can move on from them. At the same time, critics would also write that her music written for the concert hall that had more thematic development and more, beef in them was too masculine. So she really couldn't win with the critics. She was too feminine, but she was also too masculine, and they just couldn't reconcile, that she was able to write for these different settings and have different approaches to style based off of the setting that she wanted the music to be performed in. She eventually, when she was in the United States, she gave a performance at Carnegie Hall, and notably a critic wrote, quote, "While women may someday vote, they will never learn to compose anything worthwhile." And I think that quote really, really shows why we haven't heard much of anything about her, and we're not hearing her music today. It's not that she wasn't popular during her lifetime, because she certainly was, but the legend of Chaminade kind of died out when the critics were responsible for writing about her music, and it was quickly pushed out of favor after that. So the reason I really wanted to share this story with you is to, of course, expose you to one more composer for you to go out and listen to the works of, but just to show you that there's a lot of factors that go into what music and what composers we think of as the greats. And sometimes it's something as, I don't want to say trivial because it made the biggest difference, but something as unavoidable or unchangeable as what gender the composer was. She was a female composer at a time where that just couldn't be stomached by a lot of critics, even if the public really liked the music in the first place. So what I encourage you to do is go out and listen to a piece by Chaminade. If you don't know where to start as a flutist, I will of course wholeheartedly recommend that you start with the Concertino Opus 107. It's one through composed piece. There's not different movements, and it's very lovely, a lot of character, a lot of beauty. But of course you can Google and find any number of her other pieces. There's plenty out there that's good to do. I also would love if you could put in the comments the name of another composer that most people don't know of. I want to be exposed to more new music and also these historical composers that we just don't know as much about today, and I'm sure everyone else on this page is here for the same reason. So let us know in the comments on our various social medias what your favorite non-well-known composer is, and let's all check them out. Thank you so much for listening.